And I'd like to begin by talking about what that means. You see, when you reach this heightened state of awareness, what happens is that you begin to develop a consciousness that allows you to manage the coincidences of your life. Something that Carl Jung spent his lifetime writing about and talking about. That instead of thinking of things happening to you and the coincidences that sort of just show up in your life that you call, oh, miracles, or that you call, wow, wasn't that weird, or wasn't that an interesting set of circumstances for that all to come together like that, you begin to have a different awareness, which is where I place my attention and leave my attention by leaving my ego behind and allowing this higher part of myself to reside there. Where I keep my attention, I can literally bring into the world of the manifest. Or I can go from the wave to the particle, or whatever you want to call that. And that's a very intriguing notion. I wrote a book a few years ago called You'll See It When You Believe It. And I have a chapter in there that I called synchronicity. Now this is a Jungian term. And it really sort of defines this process of how you can collaborate with fate. Now, most of us have been trained on a set of beliefs that keep us from having any conviction that this is something that is within our control. In fact, many of us have been trained to believe that to even think like this is blasphemous. To think that you have perhaps this kingdom of heaven is within you. And in reading the New Testament, and I always wonder about so much criticism when I remember talking on the Oprah show one time about God, that most people don't have a problem believing in God, they have a problem in knowing that they are God. That God is within them. And she said to me, you realize that there's a lot of people watching all over this country, particularly in certain regions of the country, who are going to find this idea that they are God pretty absurd. And I said, well, that's just the way it is. And then as I was getting prepared to write this new book, I came across St. Paul's letters to the Philippians. And in Philippians 2, which is a series of letters that St. Paul wrote after being in prison, about words of Jesus, because St. Paul literally wrote the New Testament. And he said these words. And I often want to ask the people who find this so blasphemous what these words mean. He said in Philippians 2, verses 5 and 6, he said, "Have in you the same mind as Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God." And so I would ask you to consider that and have that mind. That God is not just something that is outside of you, but that you are extensions of it. But know that this thing, this divine force, is in all of us. And that in order to be able to get to this state of heightened awareness where you can manage the coincidences of your life and know this eternal force and be able to manifest and create whatever it is that is in your heart's desire, as long as you stay on purpose, you must first do some things that perhaps are difficult for us to do. So the first key to higher awareness is this. I call it erasing your past. Erasing your past. And this I will spend the most time on because it's the one that the most people struggle with. An intention is something that I can only illustrate to you by and so that you will understand this thing of synchronicity and being able to create. Like, I'm in Madison Square Garden last November, all right, and I'm going to give a talk there at the Felt Forum. And I used to teach at St. John's University in New York, in Queens. And it had been, maybe 17, 18 years since I had been back. I left there in 1976. And I hadn't seen my former department head, who hired me at St. John's right after I got my doctorate in 1970, to come there and teach. And a really nice guy and a very good friend. So I thought, I'm going to look him up. I've been thinking about him a lot, and I'm going to look him up. So about 2 hours before I go on, I'm thinking about Bob, and I go to the lobby of the Felt Forum, and I go into a phone booth, and I get the Long Island, he lived in Garden City, I get the Long Island directory, and I go to Garden City, and I'm looking up his name, and I can't quite find it, and I turn around and I look up, and he's standing there. Now, it's 18 years since I've seen this man, and I've been thinking about him, and I'm thinking I'm going to, and he's standing there. Now, everybody goes, oh, booga, booga, wow, what's going on here? I got to call everybody I know. Okay. So there was a time when I used to do the same thing. Oh, man. But see, this stuff happens so much now that I'm beginning, maybe I've got to really work on this ego thing, but I'm beginning to think that I can do this, all right? See? So now I don't even just think I can do it, I know I can do it. I know that the mechanics of creation are such that if I stay on purpose in my life, where I place my attention, I can manifest from that placement of attention, as long as I do it without the other four keys to higher awareness, which I'm not going to tell you about yet. But as long as I keep my attention there, and don't allow anyone else to smear it. You see, in order to be able to create anything for yourself in your life, you first must be able to conceive of it. And the corollary of that is, if you can't conceive of it, you can't create it. And the problem in trying to teach people to become spiritual masters, enlightened beings, the problem is not in teaching the mechanics of this. The mechanics are really quite simple. What you do is really fairly simple to do. The problem is in convincing people that they have the capacity to do it. Because most of us are stuck in something, now I do have to write this, I'm sorry, something called a paradigm. A paradigm. And a paradigm is a way of thinking or behaving which traps us into believing, like the father with his son, into believing a truth because we've had it drilled into us by so many people that we can't think any other way. And that's why I say this first key is so important. You have to be able to let go of your past. And before we take a break, I am going to try to give you, I'm going to give you the formula for doing that. And try to illustrate it with some of what I think of as the best stuff that's ever come down the pike in terms of getting rid of this stuff in the past. But a paradigm, let me give you an illustration of a paradigm. In 1968, okay, go back, 1968. What country in the world do you think was the world's largest manufacturer of wristwatches? Switzerland. You get an A. And everybody would have come up with that, virtually everybody, in 1968. The Swiss had been making watches for centuries, and they were considered the leading experts on watches. Now it's 1995, okay? Less than 30 years later. And what country, by a factor of 10 to 1, is the leading producer of wristwatches in the world today? Japan. Now, the reason why that shift has taken place in a relatively shorter period of time is something called paradigm. In 1968, someone came to the Swiss manufacturers in Geneva and said, "We have a new idea for making watches. We're going to get rid of the mainspring. We're going to get rid of the winding mechanism. We're going to get rid of the whole inside. And we are going to replace it with a quartz movement and put in a battery. That battery is going to last for years, and it will keep perfect time, and it's going to transform the watchmaking industry. And the Swiss said, don't tell us how to make watches. We have been doing it for centuries. We are the experts. We will tell you. That was their paradigm. And they continued making watches the way they did, and they went to the Japanese. Now, that little example, I've always remembered that when I heard that the first time. And I say it to you because you can also get stuck in a paradigm in your life, in lots and lots of areas. Most of us have these kinds of things that we hang on to and that we believe so strongly because we have been conditioned by all of our well-meaning sort of other egos who have shown up in our life to guide us and have directed us on a path that is mostly directed by our lower identities. And while we pay some attention to our higher identities, we usually just do it on Sunday mornings or Saturday evenings. And the rest of the time we have sort of a whole different way of approaching it. And a paradigm is something, now I have a teacher that I work with that is really, I think, a very enlightened being. And he told me, he said, if you want to get out of the paradigms that you're in, and I was like, me? I'm Wayne Dyer. I'm not stuck in anything, all right? He said, well, one of the things you're going to have to learn to do is you're going to have to learn to kill your ego. I said, well, I really can do that. I can kill my ego. I said, well, what's the test? How do you know when you've killed your ego? He said, well, the test for killing your ego is you check yourself into a dirty, grungy motel room that smells of piss. And you stay in that room until it no longer matters whether you're there or not, and whether anyone visits you or not. And the minimum stay is 3 months. You have to stay until it doesn't matter whether someone visits you or you visit someone else. You just check yourself in. And I said, when? He said, now. I said, well, I got to call. No, you don't call, you do it. I said, well, I already failed the first test. So the second test of being able to get out of a paradigm is to get up between 3 and 6 a.m. every day for 2 years. And in that time period, you walk in the woods, and if there's no woods, you walk in the streets without any fear. You abandon fear and you walk, or you run. In the woods preferably, and after 2 years, you will know why you are doing it. And I am in that test right now. I've been in it since August the 18th. In reading the Seth material, Jane Roberts said that we are awake at the wrong time and asleep at the wrong time. That the best time to be awake is between 3 and 6 a.m., wherever you are. And that, she said, virtually every single one of you, and I'd like to put you to this test, every one of you will receive a wake-up call from God between 3 and 6 a.m. You will wake up for a moment, note the time, and then listen to your ego and go back to sleep. Or maybe get up if you got a prostate problem and get right back into bed and say, well, it's 3:30. I don't get up at 3:30 in the morning. Only a fool would do that, you see. And that the best time to be asleep is between 3 and 6 in the afternoon. And that between 3 and 6 in the morning is when the world is silent. And you will and I've learned this after 6, 7 months of doing this, I've learned that I am the most clear in these hours. And I have begun to have this awareness after 6 months now of being up in these hours that I am losing the paradigm that I was stuck in. And the paradigm that I was stuck in says, if you don't get enough sleep, you're going to be very tired for the rest of the day. And I've only had, let me see how fit I am and how good I feel. Where's my watch? Where's the clock? I've got to find out, well, let's see, I went to bed at 11 4 hours. It's going to be a deficit of 4 hours, so I'm going to be sleepy all the rest of the day, and then I'm not going to get this done, and tonight we've got to go here, and I'm going to be sleepy then. I'm going back to sleep. Now, there was an ancient Sufi poet. His name was Rumi. And Rumi had, in one of his poems, he said, do not go back to sleep. Do not go back to sleep. Do not go back to sleep. So what I have done, and what my teacher said to me, he said, you will find this difficult at first, because your ego will be telling you all the reasons why this is absurd. So what you do is you wake up and you put your feet on the floor. And then if you want to go back to sleep, sleep with your feet on the floor. Which I have done on a few occasions. But not for very long. And the ironic thing about all of this is that I now, when I go to sleep, it doesn't make any difference what time it is. I can't wait for 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to arrive and to get out there and be, no matter what the temperature is or what city I'm in or where I am, I can't wait for that. And I have eradicated fear from my consciousness. It's just like knowing that I'm protected and that I'm fine and that it's going to be all right. And so I would just throw that out to you. There are probably people in the room here who get up in those hours, not to go to work, but often to meditate or to write or to do their music or to create whatever it is that you're creating or to think through whatever. This is a very, very spiritual time of the day. It is the most spiritual time of the day. It is the time when you have more silence. And as Melville said, silence is God's one and only voice. And you will begin to make a direct sort of communication with the higher part of yourself if you can remove so many of the distractions. So that's a paradigm. Another paradigm that I've learned to transcend was when I went through a week of training with Taekwondo. And in Taekwondo, you learn how to use your feet as if they were hands. Now, most of us have been taught that our hands do certain things and our feet do certain things. Our feet are for walking. Our hands are for picking things up. But you can learn in quite a short time if you have banished all of that doubt and opened yourself up and have that willing suspension of disbelief. If you willingly suspend that, you can train your feet to do everything that your hand can do. You can train it to punch, you can train it to pick things up, you can train it to do virtually anything you can do with your hand. And people who lose their hands learn this very fast. So it's like a new paradigm. When you first start trying to pick things up with your feet or to try to use your feet to manipulate or to punch with or to whatever, you're just all discombobulated. Now these are just sort of physical things. You can do this in the area of eating. You can do this in the area of your relationships. Most of our relationships are a function of paradigms. We relate to each other in the way that we have been told is the only way that you can relate. And so when someone else says something to us that we find offensive, we immediately respond with anger. And that's a paradigm. In Everyday Wisdom, this little book of quotes, my favorite quote in there is this whole idea that if you really want to improve the quality of your relationships, whatever you paid to get in here tonight, just this one little sentence will really dramatically alter your relationships. And I'm not just talking about the person that you live with. I'm talking about people that you meet on the street, people that you work with, people that wait on you in restaurants, whomever they are. When you have the choice, and you always do, to be right or to be kind, just pick kind. It's a whole new paradigm. I no longer have to be right. Whew. Now there is a shift in awareness that will lead you to higher consciousness. Someone says, you really are an asshole. And you say, I appreciate you pointing that out. You know, I really do behave like a jerk a lot. And having someone to point it out to me really probably will help me to transcend that. It's very nice of you. The subtitle of my new book is called Making the Decision to be Free. Making the decision to be free. Now, freedom, the best definition I ever heard of freedom was offered by Florinda Donner in a wonderful book called Being in Dreaming. And Florinda Donner defined it this way. She said, freedom is the absolute lack of concern about yourself. Now that's freedom. When I was walking with Marianne Williamson in Melbourne, Australia, just a few months ago, we toured the Australia, speaking down there. And we went for a walk one day. My oldest daughter, was babysitting her little girl, Emma. And we went for a walk for about 2 or 3 hours, just talking about the tour and what we were going to do on the programs and all of that. And she said to me, out of nowhere, she said, come on, Wayne. She said, tell me, do you have any secret desires? Just like... Now, there was a time when someone asked me that question in a park, you know, a woman, I would have come up with a sort of a crass remark. But I said, yes, I do have secret desires. She said, what is it? I said, I would like to disappear and still be here. And I remember reading in some of Castaneda's later works saying that freedom is really a disappearing act. It's like you have to learn how to disappear your ego. And the absolute lack of concern about yourself and how things affect you and how self-absorbed you are and how important you are and their need to be right all the time and all of that. This is all stuff that is part of a paradigm that we have been taught because we believe in this, ego, which stands for edging God out. Our ego is the part of us that is our false self. And I say that without qualification. It is the part of us that would have us believe that we are separate from, that we are more important than, that we are special. And I want to tell you right now, folks, if you want to understand higher awareness, you got to get off of this thing that you are special. You are not special in the eyes of God or anyone else. It implies, if you're special, that someone else is not, doesn't it? And if everyone is special, then we don't need a word like that, do we? To specify who is and who isn't. We are all divine creations, extensions of God. Every single one of us. No one better, no one more important, no one more advanced, no one prettier, no one more anything. And this whole idea that we have been carrying around with us about what it is that offends us and what it is that we find difficult to live with and how important it is for us to be right and to make other people wrong. All of this stuff is an absence of higher awareness. And you've got to somehow figure out a way to transcend it. And know and begin to believe in something that you can't see. Believe in something that you can't see.